Hello, everyone. Kevin Dorsey here. I'm one of the site managers of the SAP Concur community. Today, we will be talking about audit rules. I have with me today Donna Haskins, audit rule enthusiast and expert. Thanks for joining me, Donna.
Thanks so much for having me.
Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role here at SAP Concur?
Absolutely. I'm currently a select care manager after I've spent years in service administration and working with new and existing client customers as a senior consultant. But I've been here for a total of 7 years. But for 10 years before that, I was a client admin, like so many of you in the community, working with Concur Expense and Travel at a startup company in Durham, North Carolina. I currently live in Western Massachusetts here in the United States.
All right, great. Got a lot of good background, a lot of experience, so that's always good. So the reason that I wanted to do this video is because in all the years I've attended Fusion, I think I've been to maybe 6 Fusion events. And I always noticed that the audit rules sessions seem to be packed, standing room only, always full. So obviously it's a very popular topic. So I thought it'd be kind of good to have our own little micro session here and post it out on the SAP Concur community. So I'm just going to start off with 2 general questions about audit rules. And then there's a couple of questions that our community members posted that I'd like us to answer for them. So let's start off with very easy question, fairly straightforward. What is the purpose of using audit rules?
Well, audit rules is a tool within Concur that allows our customers to either stop or warn their end users when they have an expense that meets certain conditions. It reminds your users of their policy. It requires the specific information that you need to be able to post for accounting, audit, or reporting purposes. It can also highlight specific expenses for others in the workflow. And in essence, it kind of lets SAP Concur be the bad guy and like tell employees what they're not able to do.
All right. Yeah, we're the bad guy in that regard there. A couple of things that just kind of pop into mind. One, I had a coworker tell me some years ago, audit rules are just to drive user behavior. If you want them to do something or not do something, usually within or make sure that they're within policy, or if they're out of policy to let them know. So very good. And I do get people, posting that, Concur wouldn't let me submit my report, which in a way is true, but then I try to nicely tell them, well, it's the Concur system telling you, but it's your company that implemented the rule. Concur did not create the rule or turn it on and make it active. So just want to clarify that. But yeah, in a way, it lets the tool be the bad person.
Yes.
It's a good way to put it.
Yes.
All right, next question. So this is kind of maybe more for newer site administrators that don't have too much audit rule experience, but when it comes to building or using audit rules, what are some best practices that administrators should consider?
I think I really liked, I was looking through the SAP Concur community, and Leela 2516, I thought had some really great rules that are all ones that I have told clients in the past and really thought were very good for you to kind of keep in mind as guidelines. The first one she said was the audit rule is necessary, and that's so true, because if you have if you have an audit rule that if you have a number of audit rules at expense at entry save, every time that an employee hits save on an expense entry form, the system's going out and checking all of those audit rules. So you don't want to just have it doing something just to do something. You want to make sure that it's truly necessary and something that you want to use, like you said, to drive behavior. You also want to make sure that it's appropriately set up, either as a warning, so it shouldn't do that, but you can, just letting you know that, or a hard stop where you absolutely cannot do that. That's that 99 exception level. The audit rule name should be specific enough that you do not need to open the audit rule to get the gist of what it is doing. Sometimes when I'm working in a site, I'll create an audit rule that just says test, and that's just bad, because then you always have to open that audit rule to even be able to see, okay, wait a minute, what was I testing in this audit rule? the audit rule exception message, when it's triggered, the message really needs to be clear, concise, and provide the employee with the instruction of what they have to do to resolve the exception. That is really the only way that you're going to let the system do the work for you, and you're not going to be having to deal with emails and phone calls from employees who may be thinking, hey, Concur won't let me do this. You really need to help them be able to help themselves. And so one thing to keep in mind with that is, especially any of your exception messages that have a 99, you need to make sure that they're visible to that end user. Sometimes you'll see that where a client may accidentally put it to approver and processor, and then the employee has no idea why they can't submit that report. The other thing you want to really keep in mind is you've got to test to make sure that the audit rule works the way you want it to, and that also it works that it doesn't work when you don't want it to. A great example of this was a client had asked me to put an audit rule in to flag if the employee didn't add an attendee on specific expense types. I created the audit rule and gave it back to them in a few minutes, and then they immediately call me back and say it's showing up on every expense type, on every expense entry. And sure enough, I had forgotten to add that very important condition of which expense types I wanted the audit rule to fire for. So testing is critical. So yeah, so those I would say are the best practices to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would add to the testing part is a lot of, especially for newer site administrators, if you're still kind of implementing and still working with SAP Concur, have them create you a test group. That way you can apply the rule to the test group first, see if it's working as expected, and if not, no other actual users see the rule firing, which is good. So
and along those same lines, if you have, because sometimes with test groups, you don't have exactly the right conditions, like say you have a trip segment, nobody has a trip segment, but that's where you could put an employee ID number in the audit rule. So it would only fire for one person. Obviously you need to let them know ahead of time, but that's another way, just another way to test specific scenarios that you can't do with the test group. So yes.
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought of that, but yeah, assign it to a single user. That's a great tip. Now we have a couple of questions that I took off of the SAP Concur community out of the admin group. So we'd like to cover those. And this one's been asked a couple of times of me. I remember the first time it was asked, I thought, oh yeah, that should be possible. And I sat there and I even probably asked somebody else here at SAP Concur to help and to see if this rule was possible. So I'm just going to ask it, is it possible to create an audit rule that prevents more than a certain number of reports to be submitted by the same person in the same month?
So there's not.
That was kind of a mouthful there, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's not possible to do this. Now, what I have seen some clients do, some customers tackle this by actually having a dollar limit, because sometimes a new employee loves Concur. They're like, this is so easy, quick. And I've seen in clients' sites where, an employee submits 7 reports in a day, and you're like, wait. So what I have seen some customers do is actually set up an audit rule with a dollar limit. So if the expense report is under a certain dollar, the exception message just says, hey, please wait until you have $50 or whatever, the limit is. But there's really not a way for us to say, okay, you can only submit 1 expense report per month.
Right. And when you look through the condition options you have in audit rules, there's nothing that says employee has already submitted report this month. Unfortunately, It'd be really nice if there was, but
Absolutely.
There are ways maybe to work around it, be a little creative, like you said, with the amount, and make sure it's a high enough amount instead of just submitting, every time you have a single expense. I've seen reports with like a $12 expense report because it was one lunch. And then that person had another one for breakfast and it was a whole nother expense report. So
And
But
that's
one of,
also where, you know, when you see it, I'm sure you guys are all dealing with this. It's like training, 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 right? Like, how do you get that information out through company news or, you know, some other way to make sure that your end users understand, hey guys, like one expense on an expense report, you know, it's not a good situation.
exactly.
Yeah.
I always recommend using the company notes if I get a chance to give recommendations to the site admins. Always a good place to put it, but again, not everybody reads those, but
True.
unfortunately.
Yes.
All right. Next question from the community. Can an audit rule be built that ties to a workflow step? And if so, what would a common example be?
Absolutely. You will need some help from Concur unless you've taken the advanced configuration training and maybe have, you know, access to the super secret parts of Concur, as I call them. But if Concur can definitely help you either support configuration services, one of your essential, your expertise in care products, one of their consultants can definitely help you. What you see with a lot of clients is you may have a situation where maybe tuition reimbursement needs to be reviewed by someone in HR to make sure that it's within budget for this specific employee. In that situation, you can sometimes have an audit rule exception code that's mapped in a specific workflow step to an authorized approver or through a specific change approver step. So that's one way that some clients use it. Most of the clients that I work with, I encourage them because maybe they don't want someone in their back office reviewing every single expense report, but there are certain scenarios where they want to make sure that someone from accounting looks at this expense. And some of those scenarios might be they have a corporate card program, and so cash transactions that are over $500 in a report, or maybe it's where the employee is cross-charging something to a different company code or to a different department code that's not normal practices, right? They want somebody to see that. In that situation, what I do is in the workflow, I put in that if the expense is a certain exception level, because when you're creating those audit rules, when you get to the exception portion, you get to set the code or the level. And what I normally do is say use a level of 75. And so then as you as the administrator find scenarios where you want to have the back office look at these specific reports, you can create an audit rule and just use that 75 exception level, and the system's going to automatically put reports that meet those criteria are going to go directly to that. Well, not directly, but in the workflow, it will stop at that workflow step.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at that. So just kind of to recap, you use 75 because it's a number that's not used very often in the exceptions because it's mostly 1 or 99 pretty much.
And some older people who've been using Concur for a long time might use a 51. That used to mean something different in an older Concur product. But so you'll see those three for the most part. But yes, 75, or you can use 80. Because there is also another way that you can use exception totals to say, like, if a report has a number of if the total exceptions in a report are greater than a certain number, you can also have it stop at a workflow. But that's a discussion for another day.
Right. And I've actually seen some, it's very rare, people that say if the exceptions on your report total over a certain amount, then it's going to hard stop it because there's too many exceptions that are yellow, but too many yellows make a red, so to speak. Kind of like in, football or soccer.
Yeah,
2 yellows,
exactly.
you get a red kind of a thing. So,
yeah, absolutely.
all right. So let's do a little bit of practical examples. So there's 2 audit rules that were mentioned on the SAP Concur community. So if you want to go ahead and pull your screen up, and then I'll read the rule to you, and then you can show us the example of that rule.
Okay.
All right, so I can see your screen there. Good. So the first one that was brought up on the community was a rule that prevents users from submitting expense reports if they have company card transactions over, and I said 60 days old, but that was just an example of a number because the number could be whatever the customer wants, 45, 60, 90. So rule preventing users from submitting expense reports if they have company card transactions over a certain number of days old.
Exactly. So you'll see that here I have it already built out here, and I have it just called unused card transactions with aging. I have it at the event of report submit, because as you know, the more that you learn about audit rules, right, the more you learn that you don't know. But just keep in mind that the event really does drive a lot of how and when an audit rule is going to fire. And so we want this to fire at report submit. And then obviously we can always apply this to specific people. So maybe there's, an executive group or somebody that you don't want to apply this to. You would be able to just choose specific groups that you would apply this audit rule to. But for now, I'm just going to keep this all global. It's active. And then when I come over here to the conditions, right now I just have that if there is any entry on this report that has the payment type of cash, so I'm using my any and equal. And then if the employee has unused card transactions with the current, it's cut off. So I use current date minus transaction date. So if it's greater than 60, and so I'll just want to point out that you do have two options here. You also have options down here that say if they have unsubmitted card transactions. And so it's really important to know the difference between those conditions, because if employee has unused card transactions, that means that those card transactions are sitting out in available expenses. Unsubmitted means that that card transaction is actually on your report that you have currently, that they're currently trying to submit. And so it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. But so for here, I'm trying, it doesn't matter to me in this example if they have card transactions that are over 60 days, as long as they're putting them on this expense report to submit along with the cash transactions, then I'm going to be okay with this. So with these two conditions, now I've come over and I do have a 99, which stops them and tells them that those older transactions must be submitted before this report can be submitted. Or I would probably also change, this is the out of the box exception, I'd probably also include language that it can be assigned to this report as well. And then once it's done, once it's submitted, then they would be able to submit.
All right. Yeah, that exception message, as you pointed out in your best practices earlier, should be very specific and let them know exactly what to do. Because I've seen some where I read the message and I was confused on what to do. And I think I'm pretty decent at using our expense reporting tool. And I was like, well, I'm not quite sure what that message is telling you. So I really had to do some detective work, and users don't want it. They want to just be able to be told what I need to do to correct this and move on.
Exactly.
That's kind of a little side note there. So
yeah, no, absolutely. You want it to be as crystal clear as you can get it. And so, yeah.
All right. So the second rule that came up was a rule that requires an e-receipt to be matched to a company credit card charge.
I love this, particularly Kevin, because one of the things that I love to tell clients is if there's a similar audit rule that's maybe out of the box Concur audit rule, you always want to start there. And so any of our clients, customers that have been implemented since 2016 probably have a similar audit rule that's already in their system. That's just called this travel forced match, and it talks about e-receipt in the travel segment and the card, company card transaction. So I actually just copied this and I created this second one, and we'll open it up. And you can see here it's entry save, editable by, applies to, and you'll notice here that I have it again at global, and it's active. But then when I come over to the next, to the conditions screen, I want to point out to you that I am actually excluding our employees that don't have a company card, because we don't want to frustrate them. And if they don't have a company card, then we can't require them to attach a company card transaction to an e-receipt. So we're going to say employee has a company card equals yes. And then we're going to say if the payment type is equal to pending card transaction, which doesn't allow you to submit it either anyway, but I just wanted to have all of it in the same audit rule. So if it's pending card transaction or if it's cash, and just be careful when you're doing these that you make sure that you always have parentheses around it or conditions, especially because they're pointing to the same data type. And so obviously you can only have one or the other. You can't have both. So you've got your or and your conditions. And then I'm excluding itemized entries on an expense because the receipt is normally attached at the parent entry, or if it's not itemized, obviously on the expense. And they have that e-receipt. So all of these things have to be true. And this resolves to true if it's one or the other. So if all of these things are true, then we're going to have a 99, and we're going to have it say, you have an e-receipt, but no matching credit card transaction. Please wait until your credit card transaction imports into Concur expense to add this e-receipt.
All right, great. I wanted to make a
Awesome.
little note about the pending card transaction, because this confuses a lot of end users on when they see it, they're not sure what to do. So since we've got this platform here, we can tell this to the site administrators, and then hopefully they can pass this on to their end users. But if a user has an assigned corporate credit card and an item comes in, like an e-receipt or even a travel itinerary item comes in before the card charge, those are going to default to pending card transaction as the payment type. So it's waiting for that card charge to come in. So a lot of people aren't quite sure, like, well, why is it going to pending? That's the way the system's designed for anyone who has an assigned corporate card. It'll default to that. So I just wanted to clear that up so
Absolutely.
people kind of understand that a little bit better, but it still causes a lot of confusion because end users aren't sure, when the card charge is going to come in and why is it pending and why does it, sometimes it defaults to that, even if it needed to be a cash expense. So I try to help them as much as I can when I see those come up on community. So that's a good rule. So
Absolutely.
thanks for going over that with us. So those are
Absolutely.
our two examples. So we appreciate Donna, appreciate you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to share with us and cover some questions about audit rules, show us a couple practical examples. So really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And for those of you watching, if you have any questions about anything we covered today, please reach out to me on the SAP Concur community. You can find me under the username Kevin D. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.